Hello, everybody. Oh my God, so loud. Okay, so I think Kevin already said everything about us. We're going to introduce ourselves, but I think he covered everything. There is a legend that says that the world was created in 7 days, the Earth. So we're here to discuss 7 aspects of the mobile creation. So, like the common pitfalls and the easy wins. And so, this process may take longer than 7 days, but if the Earth was created in 7 days, what is your excuse for not being able to do it? So this is how a typical presentation about a typical talk about this starts. We show a device, a computer. We may quote some numbers and just say why it's so important to have a mobile application. Quote some trends, like nowadays, like everybody's using their application through mobile more than on desktop. But just because this is a typical thing, we thought we'd do it in a different way and start with a fable.
Okay, so I will start with the fable. It's a fable that we also made up. I guess nobody has ever heard of it. It's the fable of the skier who actually wanted to learn snowboarding. So I want to have a quick show of hands. How many of you have ever tried skiing before? Okay, how many of those consider themselves good at skiing? And did anyone try snowboarding? Cool. So what's my point here? My whole idea is that once you are good at something, let's say you're really good at your desktop applications that you're building, and you want to move to another context, you actually have to learn a whole new set of ideas and a whole new set of techniques. And that's pretty similar to when you want to migrate something that you already have on your desktop to your mobile device and to some sort of a smaller scale and screen device. So we told you that it's we're going to follow these 7 days. So we'll start with Monday. That's how we're used to start the week in the rest of the world. For you might be a bit strange, but on Monday our question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we really need the mobile application? Is it something that we're creating just for the sake of having it because it's cool, it's modern, everyone else has it? Or it's something that really brings additional value to our clients and customers? In order to understand whether we actually need some sort of a mobile solution, we start with some of the following activities. We might start with some sort of a survey that tries to give us a better understanding of the whole field that we're designing for as a kind of a first step before doing an actual interview or some sort of observation, for example, as a contextual inquiry. So the whole idea is that we're trying to learn as much about the context of the users as possible. And in case, of course, we're not able to do that, or we can look for other sources of ideas like user voice pages, some sort of existing infrastructure that can at first give us a very basic understanding of what that context would be. So then once we move to Tuesday, it's time for the next concept that usually looks like a very easy win, and it's when we decide to settle with a template. Here I want to speak about the web. Obviously, it's not going to be the World Wide Web because you see this spider web in the background. And what's my idea here is that once you're trying to design something for a certain context, you have some affordances. Like, for example, when the spider is putting the web together, he has to take in consideration all the environmental affordances, how, for example, the branches of the tree are or what's the whole environment. Because if the spider wants to create a very rigid structure, he has to be aware of those affordances and constraints. And once you're actually designing for mobile, templates usually look like a very easy win because you can just plug the content and it's done. but actually there is like a whole environment that you have to be consciously aware of if you want to create this sort of rigid structure. How do we do that? We can, for example, develop or return to our user stories if we have already developed those. And we can, of course, look at some more detailed use cases that describe in a lot of details how exactly the users behave. But that's, of course, something that's already based on the contextual inquiries and observations that we made before. In case we don't have such information, we again have to probably do a set of interviews and a set of observations. So I think next time handing it back to Andy.
Okay, so it's a bad idea to use a template sometimes. Okay, so I'll keep my user in mind and just take my desktop application and shrink it to fit it on the device. So that's not a good idea either. You need to rethink everything. You need to rethink what's important to show and what's not important. So you need to redesign. You need to think about what to remove for a mobile designs. What's important? What can you hide? Like using controls to hide content, like expanders. So you need to make some improvements for touch interactions because the desktop is very different from mobile. The basic functionalities of your desktop application that are going to be migrated to a mobile design should be like easily spotted. You need to think what you want to, what those functionalities should be. Okay, and then after you decide what to show, there's also like a deeper level below the user interface that we need to think. And there's other things that you need to take into consideration when migrating some aspects that are really important too. So here's some technical aspects that you need to take care. You need to think if you want this application to be web-based or a native application. They have a very different development process. You need to think about the data consumption of the mobile devices and to think if you need to like lower the data consumption. So you need to take care of that. You need to take care of think of offline usage and also sync after when you go back online. You need to think that if your application needs to have location, you need to think that the battery suffers from that functionality to be on all the time. So you need to think if you need to have it in your mobile application or not. Also, if when I'm using this mobile application, am I moving? Am I staying still? Those things are really important to keep in mind when you design. Also, if it's a dark environment or very bright, like outside, if it's noisy or quiet. And also, web and mobile devices are more insecure than desktop, so it is a really important thing to take into consideration.
Okay, so it's me again. I don't know about what you like to do on Friday. On Friday, I personally like to have a little read. And like one of the books I particularly like is Stephen Crook's Don't Make Me Think. And why I'm saying this is because here my notion is don't make me type. I don't know about you, but I really hate typing on mobile because of the lack of any sort of tactile feedback. And I'm trying to say here that we have to actually take advantage of all the sensors and all the different sources of input that the device provides to us. It could be, of course, sensor data that's telling us stuff like whether the person is, for example, moving, walking, jumping, or he's just in a more or less stable and standing environment. We can also take advantage of all the contextual data, which is, for example, information about the location of the user, whether he's inside a particular city, for example, or he's out in the country area. We can take advantage of user behavior and behavioral data because once we are able to accumulate any kind of sensory data over time, we actually know that the user has been in certain similar conditions before, and we know what already had made sense for him back in that time. So based on his behavior, we can actually be more concrete with the information that we provide. And of course, when it comes to not being able to actually provide another sort of input, we of course prefer the selection paradigm rather than typing, which is like can be achieved by a different set of controls, like all sorts of pickers and selectors. So what's left for Saturday? I don't know if you have heard this kind of idea, but many people say what I cannot measure, I cannot really improve because I don't know if I have improved when I'm not able to measure it later on. What do we measure? I'm going to share here some ideas that I kind of put together a while ago for research that I had to do for Infragistics. And it's also, in particular, related to how we can use analytics for mobile applications. So first, if we look at the metrics that we're interested in, there are three very prominent phases of the user engagement with our application. Is the user acquisition phase, where they actually get to learn about the application. It's the usage phase, or the phase that they're actually like using continuously the application over time. And then, of course, is the retention. So when we look at acquisition, we usually have some sort of a campaign to get to the user. And click-through rates are something very typical that we try to measure then. How we can, for example, measure the click-through rate in a very familiar scenario. If we put our application via the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, it's very useful to measure the number of page views on the application homepage in the store compared to the number of downloads and installations. Like downloads and installations might vary. For example, on Apple, they usually mean the same thing because people always install. But sometimes on other platforms, it's not always the same thing. So maybe we should pick one or the other, which makes more sense for us. Of course, the number of downloads and installation is also one crucial thing that we want to take in account. And then when we move to the usage phase, we're interested usually in three things. First is the number of active users. So what is an active user? It's actually a user that creates a session or starts the application within a certain period of time. That's usually measured on a daily basis. So if, for example, today we have 100,000 of our 10 million users opening the app, that gives us some sort of a notion of the number of active users for that day. Another thing that we're interested, of course, is the sessions per user, because it makes sense not only to count the number of users, but also how often they use the application within that same period of time. Because some users might create 1 or 2 sessions, others may create tens of sessions within the same period. And that's actually also giving us an idea about the activity and the engagement of the people and with our application. And when we talk about user behavior, there's like a whole universe of measures that we can do there. There are all sorts of things, but as a very basic measure that you can, for example, use, it's the popularity of your app screens. So you can look at the screens that are kind of like most visited or most longest time spent on a certain screen to get some sort of an idea about the particular behavior within the application. And when it comes to retention, there are 2 very useful metrics there. We have the day retention, which is more or less a relative measure. I don't know if you've heard this notion of the 7th day app or the 7th day retention. It's the concept of how many users open your application 7 days after they have installed it. That's why it's relative, because it's relative to the date of the installation. But of course, you can look at the date retention, which is a more kind of a concrete thing. It's not so relative. And it actually tells us what percentage of your users are creating a session on that particular date of the month. And the legend, as Andy started, says that Sunday is the day for the rest, but that's not the case in our case. So once you actually learn, or I told you that in the beginning I also raised hand with all of you because when I was like 3 years old, like small toddler, my parents got me on the skis. But then at some point in my life, I decided to like try out snowboarding. I think I was around 22, 23. And the interesting thing is that after I snowboarded for a couple of years, I got back on the skis. And it turned out that I was skiing faster, I was making better turns, I was actually changing my weight distribution much more smoother. And what I'm trying to say here is that once you are able to learn that whole new set of information about how your users use your product in a mobile context, the very obvious thing is to go back to your desktop application because you know a lot more than you used to know before. And it's very likely that you will be able to make some sort of revision on it, which with this whole new information that you now know, in addition to what you used to know before, you can actually provide a better experience and a better journey for your users. So back to Andy.
Okay, so to illustrate this example of switching back, I want to talk about an example, a case that we have here of one of our products, which is called Report Plus, which is our reporting tool for mobile devices. It's a practical way to get reports closer to a user. It's easy to use. It's for business analysts. And there was a need to have it on a desktop platform too. But why? Because there are some technical limitations on the web. It needed more IT support to set up some servers, some servers, and to connect to some data sources. So, and also we discovered that the users that create the reports, not the ones that go to meetings and share the reports with people, the ones that actually sit on a computer and create them, they need to sit on a computer. 95% of those users just sit on a desktop, and they probably have more than one display to visualize all the data that they need to create a report. So the need for a desktop application with all the core and good functionalities of the mobile application, it was like it needed to be done. What else? I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a logical step to go back to desktop and create an application that is more suitable for the creation of these reports and dashboards. And so just because you went to mobile once, it does not mean that you have to stay as a mobile application forever. You need to rethink all the time after a few, I don't know, often, not every day, but you just don't get stuck in one platform just because everybody's doing it. Just rethink and rework and always keep redesigning. Do we have any questions? Mm-hmm.
Questions? There must be some. The weather in South America today is not like this. Yes.
Did you hear it well, or could you repeat the question on the mic, because I'm not sure if everybody.
So I recently saw a talk by Jared's School where he kind of poked holes in some of the analytics gathering processes, and he gave us a couple of examples where this particular analytic could tell us this or it could tell us that, and one of the ways to find out is to follow up with contextual inquiry or go and ask the people who are responsible, or the people who are giving you that data, what does that mean for So I was just asking, since you mentioned analytics as part of your process,
Yep.
you know, if you guys have gotten stuck, as I'm sure you all have, and what you do in that case to figure out what they need. Thank you.
Okay, so what you said is exactly right. Analytics give you some sort of notion where the problem might be hiding, but it doesn't like give you the exact idea of what the problem is. And all that behavioral data, for example, gives you some sort of a idea or reference or direction where you should dig in, but it's not really providing the understanding or the answer. Like, for example, we're also doing another set of tasks for another product, which exactly has this notion that we're using analytics as a baseline on one hand, and as a guiding star for our further research. But of course, then we take all sorts of different tools. Contextual inquiry is one tool, of course. You can, for example, products that are online or on the web, you can record the user journey with different set of tools. You can also record the mouse movement or clicks, which actually point you to the exact problem. But the whole analytics gives you an idea whether there's a problem or not, and gives you some sort of a baseline. It's not the case that it can also provide you with an idea of what the exact problem could be. So yeah, that you have to do a lot of digging further to understand what's exactly the issue.
Any other questions?
What analytics tool do you actually use? Google Analytics?
Yeah, we use the Google Analytics for the web products. For example, I work for DevTools. For Ignite UI, which is our whole tool set of web components, we use DevTools. I don't know, Andy, she works on other products, so maybe they use something different. Or, yeah. I know that there are also some sort of, I know there's this Slurry Analytics, which is also good. Google is just added some more features, I think, especially for mobile applications. Apple has really good analytics as well for mobile applications that are based for iOS. But Google is like kind of the largest beast of them all for now. And yeah,